Hey everyone, my name is Bill Giannone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about something a little fun, something a little interesting as it relates to the English language, and something as it relates to your business. The topic of today's webinar is it's all about your BILITY, a new way to assess your company. So we're going to talk about some fun words, and we're going to talk about some fun ways to look at your company. Let's get right into it. There are 962 different words in the English language that end with the letters BILITY. I'm sure we could probably sit there and name at least 100 of them if we thought through it long enough. Remember, there's lots of different things in the English language that all kind of mean the same thing. So the function of ability has a specific meaning to it as it ties into other words. I guess you could call it a suffix or a word ending, but it does have a specific meaning. So any word that has ability describes a condition present. As we get into the words, you'll understand more of what I'm talking about, but it's a condition present in your company. More specifically, what it describes a level of assurance about the prefix, whatever the beginning of the word is. It gives you a level of assurance. What does that mean? Again, these are English language terms, and if you're a professor, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But if you're not, let me just make it a little simpler. Everything in your company gets measured according to a scale of whatever that quote unquote ability is. You're either poor at something, or you're really, really good at something, or you're probably right in the middle or somewhere in between. And there are many, many different ways to score your company. And you just have to look at these things and then try to make a scorecard of them. The important thing is that giving you the ability to assess your company's abilities will give you a clear picture of the past, a guide to the present, and a glimpse into the future. So now out of those 962, here's what we're going to do. We're only going to use or discuss 14 specific words that can relate to your company and your company's development, your company's skills, your company's past, current, and future, like we just said. But we want to do it in a way that allows you to be the one to be making this travel. So many times companies will, look to the outside to make these assessments. They might hire a coach, they might hire the CREST network to assess themselves. Okay. That's really good. And sometimes it's necessary. But the very first person who should be the person assessing the company should always be the owner. The owner should constantly be able to assess where they stand, what's happening within the company, and then by virtue of doing that, be the first and most honest representative of how they can change what's going on. So we're going to talk about 14 of these abilities. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to break them into specific categories, and there's going to be categories that are very important when you're assessing your company. These aren't the only ones, but these are probably the most important ones that we're going to talk about. First one we're going to talk about is the potential of your company. We want you to assess the potential, both what your current potential is and what your future potential is going to be. Any good company analysis always involves looking at the risks of your company. Again, current and potential future risks. We want you to look at your brand exposure, the good and the bad. What are the good things about your brand? What are the bad things about your brand? Because when we talk about marketing and when we talk about getting out there, it's very important to understand and assess your brand exposure. So we're going to do that. Obviously, we want to look at the things that you do best, the best traits within your company. We want to look at those things. We want to be able to assess things. And there are certain ability words that we're going to look at that are going to enable you to get a really good assessment of what your best traits of your company are. And if they're not your best traits, how to make them your best trades. Remember, in restoration, there's a couple of things that all companies need to be able to do and need to be able to be in order to be successful. That applies to all businesses, but we're going to talk as it relates specifically to restoration businesses. And then finally, we want to talk about your core values. We always want to be talking about the things that you need to have as principles within your company, because if they don't exist as the foundation of your company, it's very difficult to make any of the other pieces work. So again, looking at this list, those are 5 pretty, steadfast things that we can do to get a good cross section of a company. There are lots of other things we can look at, obviously. Let's just stick at looking at these for now so that we can have a really good assessment. Once you hear me talking about some of these words that are already in your head, you're going to see where I'm going with this. So why don't we start with the words that are expressing your company's potential? I think the word that comes to mind first when anybody talks about something relating to BILITY is obviously ability. What skills and talents do your companies possess? Do you do many things well? Do you do one thing great? Or do you struggle with lots of things? What are your abilities? This is a really, really good thing for you to look at right now. What do we do best? What do we do really poorly? So you need to look at what your abilities are, and you have to be an honest assessor of your abilities. If you want to be a full service company, but you're having a really tough time just getting through the water damage part of your jobs, it's probably not a really, really good idea right now to think about doing anything in terms of full service until you can work on what your abilities are now. So look at all those different words that are in this little word art that I used: learning, capacity, business, career, core values, adequacy, attitude, knowledge. Those are very, very important words that you can use within here to talk about assessing your current abilities of your company. Don't ever sell yourself short, and don't ever say to yourself that you're not able to do something, but also don't sit there and try to sugarcoat it. You need to be brutally honest, and the emphasis there is on the word brutal. We need to be able to fairly assess our current abilities. If you're a company that's just able to do 10 jobs a month, that's your abilities right now. You know what your skill sets are. Okay. The next word that always ties in with abilities is capabilities. So capabilities is, what does your company do well, and how much can your company produce? When we think about capability is what are we able or capable of handling, right? There's a difference between what you're doing now and what your capacity is. That difference describes your capabilities. Your abilities are the things that allow you to do what you're doing now. Your capabilities are your kind of like your bandwidth. How much can you do? Okay. When we talk about ability versus capability, I'm going to give you a little bit of analysis here. Your ability is taking a pitcher of water and pouring it into a bucket. That's your ability. Can you aim properly so that the water lands in the bucket? That's your ability as a company. Your capability is, how much water do you have in the pitcher and how big is the bucket? Capability talks about growth into the future. Ability talks about skill sets you possess now. But they go absolutely hand in hand when we're talking about your potential. Let's talk about a couple more words that relate to potential. We have the word possibility. What can your company do in the future? How far can you stretch the comfort zone? What's possible? Okay. Somehow that relates to capacity, but capacity, when I described it, was really describing finite things. I was describing how much water was in the pitcher and how big the bucket was to describe capacity. Possibility is kind of like a much less structured thing. This is where you're allowing your creative mind to go wild. And you're able to say to yourself, how big can we get? Right? So the possibilities. I don't want you to sit there and say that old cliche, oh, the possibilities are endless. I want you to be realistic. What are your possibilities? And for those of you who have heard me talk about different plans, the 1, 3, 5-year plan, for instance, that is simply setting forth possibilities. That's sitting there talking about growth models, talking about hiring models, talking about marketing models. Those are possibilities. So you want to be realistic with those as well. But they do describe your potential. For those of you who are familiar with word association, we did it before with ability and capabilities. Well, we're going to do it here again. Possibility and probability. Possibility is what could happen. Probability is what's the chance of that thing happening? What are the realistic measures of your potential? So there's a big difference between probability and possibility. When we ask ourselves that question, possibility is what could happen, probability is what's most likely to happen. So when we do our business planning, we always want to be able to assess our potential based on the possibility of what could happen, but temper it or align it with the probability of what's most reasonable to happen. Is it possible if you're doing 10 jobs a month right now to get to 30 next year? Yes, that's possible, but it's more probable that you'll get to 15 or 20. So when we're going to build a plan for next year, we're going to build a plan that allows for the possibility of 30, but the probability of 15 or 20. How do we do that? Well, we train and we push and we support to 30, but we budget and we plan and we structure to 15 to 20. You see the difference between possibility and probability there? Okay, we've knocked off 4 of the abilities. We're going to move on now. Instead of talking about the potential, let's move on to our company's risks, because we always want to talk about potential because that gets us excited. That's that positive mindset about growth, about the future. A really, really smart planner always has to plan risk and reward at the same time. You can't just look at pie in the sky and what you want and what you think you can do. You also have to look at the risks. So there's 2 really important words, 2 really important abilities that you have to think about. The first one you have to talk about is liability. Does your company have debt? What about lawsuits or quality issues? Do you have any weak employees? If those exist within your company, those are liabilities. If they exist today, they are absolute hindrances to unfettered growth. They're going to always retard or slow your potential for the future. Let's think about some of them. If you have debt, the first thing you need to do before you can invest in growth is pay off debt. I've worked for years with companies that have had to go through the debt payment cycle, and it's painful because you can't grow the way you want to grow, or you can't even grow the way you need to grow until you address the debt. Now, is it possible to do both, grow and address debt? Yes, it is. But you need to have a very well-structured plan in place to handle the debt. If you owe the debt to a couple of individuals and you have a structured payment plan, then in your growth model, you design that so that you could absolutely handle both the payment of debt and the investment into growth. No debtor is going to allow you to go out and buy tons of trucks without taking care of the debt you owe to them. So there's going to have to be some sort of balance. So always be assessing that. If you've got lawsuits out there, if you're suing a client, or if you're suing someone else, and you say to yourself, well, I got a pool of money that's out there. I'm just going to have to wait and get it. You know, it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and emotional capital, if not physical capital as well, to devote into those lawsuits. You need to make sure you assess that properly. You can't just say, oh, I'm not worried about that. Because if you run out of money to be able to secure a verdict that helps you in your lawsuit, you're never going to win your lawsuit. Most lawyers won't work on the come, and if they are, it's probably not going to be a good solution for you at the end. So always be mindful of that. Let's talk about quality issues. We can link them with link employees. If you're not doing work at a really high level, that's a current liability. If you've got weak employees right now, that's a current liability for you. You can't move forward to try to grow your company if you've got those kinds of liabilities hanging over your head. You cannot be a successful company and grow without being able to address those issues first. I'm not saying you have to provide a 10 every single time you go out to a client. But if you're hit or miss and you're not providing a steady 8, 8.5, 9, you have to address that first. If you've got weak employees within your company, as you grow, you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So you've got to do your best to fade out those weak employees, or you've got to get them retrained and on a new path. That's of absolute most important. You have to address your current exposure, your current risk. Those are liabilities. Vulnerabilities are what's going to happen to you in the future. What's the biggest weakness in your company now? And where is that next landmine lurking? So vulnerabilities are areas where you're currently weak, but you have a lot of exposure. So bad employees, bad quality, those are liabilities today, but they're vulnerabilities in the future. You know what else is a vulnerability in the future? Not having a lot of capital. If you think that having 50,000 in the bank works now and you want to grow your company, you're going to need far more than 50,000 to grow your company. If you want to double the company's size, you're going to need 3 to 4 times the amount of money in the bank to do that, not twice. Once you're stable, you could probably back off. But at that start, you're going to need probably 3 to 4 times as much capital. So if you're a company comfortable with 50,000 in the bank, you're going to need 200,000 in the bank before you take on the next step. So inadequate capitalization is a vulnerability because it's not a problem now. You don't have a liability now, but as you grow, it's going to be a big thing that's going to cause problems. Another vulnerability is lack of resources. If you don't have the ability to get more equipment or to get more personnel as you grow, that's going to be a big vulnerability that you don't have right now, but is lurking around the corner. Finally, another vulnerability, and I think the most important vulnerability, is if you're a smaller company that's operating mostly based on the talents of your people, your vulnerability exists in the lack of process. All large companies operate process first. They worry about having really solid processes, and then they have the people plug in to the seats within the process. If you're not able to do that and you don't have a really good process right now, your vulnerability is huge when it comes to your growth. So understand that. Those are very, very large vulnerabilities. In the world of vulnerability, a vulnerability of yours today equals a liability tomorrow. There's no getting around that. You have to address today's vulnerabilities so that you don't have liabilities in the future. Both of them are risks to you, but you need to do a really, really good job analyzing and examining your company. One of the biggest things that I do as a business coach here at the CREST Network is I go in and I do risk assessments for companies. Most companies are pretty good at looking at their potential, and they're pretty good at wanting to design a future plan, and they're pretty good at wanting to say to themselves, I want to be a $5 million company. But the thing that they might be lacking at is being able to truly assess risk, because sometimes you don't know what lurks ahead as a $5 million company unless you've already been there. So being able to hire someone like myself to help assess risk is a very smart move, because I've seen 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, $100 million companies up close. And I understand what they look like, and I know what it looks like when you're there. So I can help you assess those risks and liabilities before they turn into liabilities. Right now, they might just be vulnerabilities. We're going to move on to category 3, and category 3 relates to words that we use to express your company's brand exposure. Your brand exposure is just another fun way to say the word marketability. How well does everybody know your company? How can you get the word out and create a buzz? So what is your marketability? Remember what I said at the very beginning? All these words that end in bility are what we said is a condition present that generates a level of assurance. So on a scale of 0 to 100, when we talk about risks and vulnerabilities, and when we talk about possibilities and probabilities, those are all, obviously sliding scales. And we could say, well, I think our skill set's a 70 or a 75. And that's what we want to do. Well, we want to do the same thing with marketability. What's our company's marketability? Do we have a really good exposure out there? Those are words we have to look at, and those are things we have to assess. We want to be able to give ourselves a level of assurance on how well we can market our product. Another word that ties into marketability is visibility. Am I out there? What level of marketing or advertising have I already done to be able to say I have an enhanced market share because I have a visible brand? Brand exposure is about the ability to get out there and what's already there. Okay, you could see the tie-ins here. Every time I tie two words together, one of them is more of like a present tense and one of them is kind of a future tense. So the visibility is basically what's out there now, and the marketability is what can I do to enhance that. So what have I already done and what can I do in the future? And it all ties into brand awareness, right? We need brand recall, that's the visibility. We need market share and share of search to create brand awareness. That's our marketability factors. So those are the things we want to be able to think about to tie in. Remember, no growth in our company is possible without marketability, without brand awareness. We're never going to be able to grow our company if people don't know how to look for us and what they're looking for. And obviously, if we don't have a good reputation, we may as well just throw it all away. So let's just put that in the front of our heads. We have to be aware of brand marketability and visibility. So think about that as we move forward. The next piece we're going to talk about, category 4, was we want to talk about words that relate to the company's best traits. There are certain words we're going to go through here. I think we're going to use 3 in this particular category, and we're going to assess the company's best traits. What are the things that we need to establish within a restoration company, especially before we decide to grow, that we need to be focusing on and we need to make an assessment of, because we want to have a really good level of assurance, a high level of assurance that these things exist in our company, that they are a condition present in our company. The first one is stability. You cannot grow your business unless the current business itself is in a stable foundation. There's no way to grow your business if what you have right now is not solid. So do your workers feel that your company will be there in a month, in a year, 10 years? How safe is your business? Stability comes in a couple of forms. Obviously, I'm always first and foremost going to talk about financial and structural stability. If you have no problem paying bills every week or every month, if you've got good collections practices, and if you've got good processes for getting the work into your office and out of your office and out in the field, get the work done quickly, I consider that a stable company. I would be 10 out of 10 times, I would recommend that company to take the next steps towards growth. But to me, you need to make a fair assessment of that. It might feel stable to you, But if I went and talked to your employees and they said, yeah, we just don't really know. The owner is just so hit or miss and he's hot and cold. And from one day to the next, we just don't know where this company's going. That's not stability. How about your lead sources? Are your lead sources going to be there in a year? I said, do your workers feel it? But do your lead sources think that you're going to be there in a year? Are they going to be with you in a year? One of the most glaring vulnerabilities, if you will, when it comes to company stability lies in the fact that their lead sources might be very transactional. If you're the kind of guy who's got a lot of plumber work because you're paying the most in your area, your relationship is very transactional. When someone else comes in and wants to pay $100 more, you're no longer stable. So that's the kind of thing I want you to talk about. We're going to switch gears a little bit now, but we're going to talk about something that's almost in an entirely different direction. But when we're talking about company growth, it's very important. And that word is mobility. Is your company portable? Can it activate quickly when needed, or is it a large, clunky machine? What I mean by mobility is I don't mean that you have to be able to work from home. Obviously, we're a services company. We have to work in people's homes. What I mean by mobility is, how fast can your company move? How quickly can your company make some changes? Is your company able to turn on a dime? Is your company able to accept new processes, new people? As a company grows, remember, there's strain on existing personnel because they might have been one of two in a department and now they're one of five. And there's a little bit of threat there. So the mobility part of it means, are you functional enough to be able to change and be able to make those flexible, and that's going to be another word we're going to talk about, the flexible movements that it takes in order to grow. I teased it already, but flexibility is our third trait that we need to be. Can your company change and adapt? Is your company more of a leopard or more of an elephant? Leopards, they talk about leopards can't change their spots, but I'm talking about the flexibility. If a leopard's running in one direction and then he stops like a cheetah or a leopard, they can instantly move and they can change their colors. Elephants are very large and lumbering, and you can tell them a mile away, they're not changing. Are you a speedboat or are you the Titanic? And we know the Titanic was not flexible and was not capable of change and wasn't very mobile. And we know what happened with that. I don't want to get too deep into that. I just want you to understand that with growth, you need to be both stable and flexible at the same time. These are very important words when you're trying to assess the ability to grow. And in order to grow, these, in my opinion, are the best traits for a company to have. I also think they're the three best traits for a great company if you want your workers to assess you. Because workers want stability more than anything else. They want to know that they don't have to worry next week that the company is going to go out of business. Once that's established, they love companies that are flexible. So I'm going to use mobility and flexibility together. They love companies that are flexible because they also envision the idea that they can move up, or they can move to a different department, or they can do something different within the company. Flexibility gives them the ability to be able to make more money or to change. Think about our industry. How many guys start on a truck and after a few years, they kind of get a little burned out? If you're a company that's constantly growing and you've got other types of positions like foremen or crew chiefs or project managers or even administrative personnel, there's possibilities for them to move. Flexibility means that you'll be allowing them, if their skill sets suit the new position, to move around within the company. So stability and flexibility not only are great for growth, but they're also fantastic company values. Finally, the last topic we want to discuss relates to your company's core values. I pinpointed two that I think are very, very important that every company literally has to have, and these are two that are two-way streets. The company has to provide them, and the company also has to demand them from their teams. And if the company can do both of them, the company can be as big as it wants to be. The first one is responsibility. Does your company do things well every time? Do you stand behind your work? And do you treat your team with respect and value their input? You need to have responsibility. You are responsible for not just your workers' lives, but your workers' families as well. You know, it becomes an awesome, overbearing at times thought process for an owner when I'll sit and tell somebody who's got 50 employees that they are responsible for the well-being of 150 to 200 people. If everybody in their business is either married or engaged or has a family, they're it's not just the 30, 40, 50 people working for them. It could be hundreds of people that they are quote unquote responsible for. So responsibility is there. You owe your workers the obligation to give them all the tools to succeed. That means equipment, vehicles, training, support, IT, financial support, fair salaries, benefits. You are responsible to them. Conversely, you must have systems and processes in place that holds everybody in the company responsible as well. Everybody needs to know what their duties are. That's what I mean about responsibility. You need to tell every person what their job responsibilities are. You can't just say, oh, just go out there and do it. That's not fair, because when they fail, they won't even know they have failed. And yet, if any one person in the company fails, it affects everyone else. So you must provide the company with every single position's roles and responsibilities. That is a core value that your company must adhere to. And like I said, it's an absolute two-way street. You're responsible to them, and through the process, you're making them responsible to you and the company. The other ability that you must have as a core value is accountability. You have to constantly be assessing your company, and you have to have standards by which you measure your team by. That this goes hand in hand with responsibilities. When you tell somebody what their roles and responsibilities are, you have to assess them and hold them accountable from time to time. Whether it's daily through the use of a CRM or a process or a management team, or whether it's weekly through meetings, or whether it's quarterly through assessments, or annually through bonus reviews. All of those things should be taking place. And the bigger you are, the more meetings you should be having. Obviously, if you're big enough, you should have a layer of management that kind of holds everybody accountable to the process every single day. But we're going to talk about this because I put this photo up here on purpose. Accountability is a true magnet for success. But there's no escaping it. Everything ties in together. The two most important core values in any company should be responsibility and accountability. You're accountable to them. If you fail them as employees or clients or even lead sources, you've got to make it right. You're accountable. And then you're also responsible, like we discussed before, to everybody in your chain. So if you look at all the different pieces of this little word tree, we've got tasks, shared responsibility, opportunity, project, team, redefine, need, necessary, members, insight. There's tons of words here. We have to make sure we put all those words together. These are very important concepts, guys. We talked about 5 pieces of your company. We talked about your potential, how to assess your potential for growth. We talked about assessing your risks for growth, right? We talked about all sorts of different things having to do with your brand awareness. We talked about your traits, the best traits of your company. And finally, we talked about what I consider to be the most important part of this whole process. Ultimately, at the end of the day, are your, all your values of your company. We need to know rights and responsibilities. We need to know accountabilities. At the end of the day, we're going to take all of these abilities and we're going to put them together, because if we make a fair assessment, whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent, all 13 that we just discussed is going to have the most important determination on the 14th ability, which for every owner should be the most important word of all, and that is profitability. Without worrying about the other 13, profitability becomes impossible. Profitability is the goal of every single company. If you're a not-for-profit, or if you're a charity, or if you're a foundation, maybe profitability might not be the most important thing, but none of us in the restoration field are doing that. We're here to make money. So if we work on all of the abilities, all the way from ability to accountability and everyone in between, we should be able to have a really good feel for assessing our profitability. We can increase profitability by tweaking any one of them. We can guarantee profitability by examining, assessing, and addressing all 13. I want to thank you for joining us today. I know this wasn't a real long webinar, but I do appreciate your time, as Dick Wagner and Scott Tarpley and his team and I do each and every week, or most weeks that we get together. We encourage you to not only keep joining us on these Tuesdays for our CREST webinars, but we encourage you to hop onto Spotify and put a search out for CRESTcast. We've got hundreds, and I do mean hundreds, of podcasts available to you. Some as short as 4 minutes, some as long as 20 minutes or so. Dick Wagner and I have been producing them for well over a year now. So there's plenty in the hopper. We still put out a couple every week. So you could look for the new ones. You could obviously sort from latest issues. You could look for some things that have interesting topics that are interesting to you. We cover every aspect of the business. We talk sometimes generic business, not necessarily relating to restoration. Obviously, with Dick's background, the vast majority of his podcast will have a sales or marketing slant, whereas the vast majority of mine will have some sort of coaching slant geared towards owners and managers. But feel free, no matter who you are, to check them out, and we would love some feedback. On behalf of Dick Wagner and everybody here at the CREST Network, I'm Bill Giannone. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.